gladiators fighting to the death, chariots thundering around a track, wild animals being mauled by hungry lions. What comes to mind when you think of the Roman Colosseum? Well, you're not alone. This image has endured for centuries in our minds. The greatest amphitheater ever built is an iconic symbol of ancient Rome. But what if we told you there was more to this monument than just the blood and thunder of the circus games? Yes, because the spectacles held in the Roman Colosseum were not always about the gladiators. Sometimes the arena floor was covered in human flesh, but not the kind that you might think. Because here, in this former Roman prison, prisoners awaited their fate, their lives about to be brutally cut short in front of thousands of screaming spectators. Welcome to my channel, and today, let's find out why. The Roman Colosseum was sometimes used as an execution ground, where men and women were thrown to their deaths in front of the entire city. To understand what went on inside these stone walls, you need to take a journey back in time. Because the scenes of carnage we see here were part of the original vision, when construction began in the year 70 AD under the Flavian dynasty. Initially, the purpose of the Colosseum was to entertain the general populace with mock hunts, animal exhibitions, and theatrical performances. The emperor at the time, Vespasian, wanted to impress Rome's citizens and show them how powerful he and his family truly were. And what better way to do that than to flood the streets with free popcorn and stage bloody battles between men and beasts, watching as common folk got torn apart by ravenous lions and tigers. It was basically the ultimate reality TV show of the ancient world. But why were these shows so popular? Let's dive a little deeper. From its inception, the Roman Empire was a violent place. Power was often acquired through military conquest, and those who opposed the emperors usually met a sticky end. Even the most powerful senators knew that they could be replaced in a heartbeat. And if you made an enemy of the Caesar, your life expectancy dropped dramatically. This didn't mean that life was great for ordinary Romans either. They lived in poverty, often crowded into dark, dank rooms in the cities. Crime and violence were commonplace, and if you were caught up in the wrong side of a riot, you might find yourself getting stabbed or worse, thrown into the Tiber River with the current. So it is not hard to see why the chance to watch others suffer and die was a welcome distraction. These shows gave people an opportunity to escape from their own problems and revel in the pain of strangers. Another reason was a need for public spectacles. Back then, there was no TV, radio, or internet to distract people, so the only form of entertainment was watching others die horribly. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. There was also another benefit to these events. Watching condemned criminals and enemy soldiers get eaten alive by large carnivores served as a warning to the rest of the population. It was a reminder of what would happen if they dared to defy the authority of the emperor. Fear was a powerful tool, and Rome's leaders knew how to use it. You'd be forgiven for thinking that throwing Christians to lions would become a thing later on. And while that's true, during the days of the Roman Empire, anyone who was considered a threat to the state could end up in the arena. Whether they were a political dissident, a traitor, or just someone who fell out of favor with the emperor, their fate was sealed. So how exactly were these executions carried out? The process was known as damnatio, and it was a form of capital punishment reserved for the most hated members of society. The term itself means condemnation to the beasts, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Before the condemned entered the arena, they were paraded through the streets of Rome in shackles and chains. They were forced to wear humiliating costumes and were often dragged behind chariots like horses. The spectacle of this procession alone was enough to please the crowds, and many of these poor souls never even made it to the Colosseum alive. In some cases, the condemned were locked up in a cage with ferocious animals, effectively serving as their dinner. Others were set loose in the arena and forced to fight off waves of attackers, until they were too exhausted to continue. At that point, the crowd would start chanting, "Kill 'em all, kill 'em all." And that's when the real fun began. There were two ways to die in the arena. The first was to be killed quickly, either by a wee-lame spear or a quick slash from a sword. The second was to have your life slowly drained away as you were mauled by wild animals. And believe me, this was no walk in the park. We're talking about real predators here, animals that had been trained to hunt and kill. For example, there were African lions, the largest of their kind, known for their strength and ferocity. Then there were Indian tigers, equally dangerous, prized for their agility and power. And don't forget the leopards, smaller but no less deadly, with a reputation for being incredibly fast and ruthless. Oh, and let's not forget the bears and the elephants. These massive creatures could easily crush bones and gore condemned prisoners with their tusks. Now, despite the gruesome nature of these events, it's important to note that they were carefully staged affairs. The animals were well trained and the handlers knew exactly how to control them. The same couldn't be said for the humans involved. These were real people facing their mortality, and many of them responded in unexpected ways. Some fought back against their attackers, desperately trying to defend themselves. Others broke down and begged for mercy. And still, others turned to prayer, hoping for a last-minute reprieve. The crowd loved it. All this drama played out in the arena, and they were eating it up. Imagine being there, the stench of blood and sweat filling your nostrils, the roar of the crowd ringing in your ears as you watch someone fight for their life against a hungry lion. That's what it was like to be a spectator at the Roman Colosseum. As the condemned fought valiantly against the odds, the crowd roared with excitement. The air crackled with tension, and the fate of each individual hung in the balance. Some condemned fought with makeshift weapons like clubs or stones, trying to fend off their wild attackers. Others used their fists and teeth, relying on their sheer willpower to survive. And let's not forget those who prayed, not just for themselves, but for the strength to endure the ordeal. But amidst the chaos and bloodshed, there were moments of grace. Sometimes a fighter would land a lucky blow, momentarily stunning their attacker and giving the crowd a much-needed breather. Other times an animal trainer would intervene, realizing that the fight was going on for far too long. The condemned would collapse, exhausted and bleeding, only to be revived by the cheers of the crowd. It was a brutal game, one where the rules were simple. Only the strongest and most cunning would survive. One particularly harrowing tale involves a woman named Prisca, who was condemned to death for poisoning her husband. She was thrown into the arena with a venomous snake and a sword. Despite the danger, she managed to stab the snake and wound it, which distracted the beast and allowed her to escape. However, soon after, she was set upon by a bear and fought for her life, until her strength failed her and the bear crushed her skull. Another heart-wrenching story is that of Gaius Valerius Catullus, a Roman senator who was betrayed by his wife and thrown to the lions. He put up a brave fight, but was eventually torn apart by the hungry beasts. His wife, Julia Misa, who had plotted against him, escaped punishment thanks to her influential father. These stories are not just tales of survival and betrayal. They were also designed to send a message to the mass. They showed the consequences of disloyalty and the importance of obedience to the Roman authorities. After all, this was Rome's way of maintaining control. By showcasing such brutality, the authorities reminded the populace of what could happen to them if they stepped out of line. Now, you're probably wondering what happened to the bodies after the executions. Well, that depended on who you ask. According to some accounts, the remains of the condemned were left for the animals to feast upon. But this doesn't seem very likely given the immense popularity of these spectacles. It is more probable that the corpses were removed discreetly and given a proper burial outside the city walls. It's unclear how many people lost their lives in the arenas of the Colosseum in this way, but it was certainly a common occurrence throughout the amphitheater's history. As the years passed, the spectacle of blood and guts grew more elaborate, and the crowds became more enthusiastic. Eventually, the Roman Colosseum became synonymous with death and suffering. And as the empire crumbled, so did the legend of the Colosseum, leaving behind a legacy of blood, sand, and the echoes of screams that still resonate through the ages. That was it for today. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that you won't miss any new videos.